me, what really connected with me is the idea, like, I thought, okay, my story is, I'm 30, I lost both my parents. And I thought my metabolism was slowing down. It's like, oh, I can't eat whatever I want anymore. I'm 30. It's actually flipped. So Michael Rose, with his fruit fly research, flipped it. So it's not that your metabolism slows down when you're 30. It's that you're less adapted to the modern diet, right? So it's like, as you age, you are less adapted to eat processed foods. And some people are better adapted than others, and some people can last longer.
Isn't it gene expression? I think is what he talked about, is that, like, genetically, as we age and you start getting in this splitting, like I think it's what is it, like genetic replication, cell replication, after a certain amount of points, like, your body doesn't have the ability to fight, and genetically you have to return to your ancestral diet. I think I could be fucking that whole thing.
It's a little bit like that. Yeah, I don't remember all the details, but you have to go back to your ancestral diet, and that's what they found with the fruit flies. And they gave them different versions. They had the ancestral. They used like apples, and they used like different jam.
The original fruit flies, they got in like a back of like some orchard in like Maine, and they brought them and they fed them. They'd had hundreds of generations eating apples, and then the next ones they brought them on, and like I think they did like. Was it bananas? And then they brought them on, and it was pretty wild to see that, like, and then I think they bred them in generations, and because they only lived 7 days, so they were able to accelerate it.
So they could look at tons of generations really quickly. And I think that's the ultimate thing, is you need to go as soon as possible, go back to your most ancestral diet. And that's actually, have you heard of paleomedicina they're in Europe somewhere. They go back to the ultimate ancestral diet, which is just like bone marrow and fat and organ meats and meat and like kind of lower protein to cure cancers and to reverse like insane things. And in extreme cases, it's basically, let's go back to the diet that we were eating like 3 million years ago. And they have amazing results. So that I think there's really something to just going back to how the human body just like what it needs. And not everyone needs that, though, right?
The other one too, which I'm going to talk out of turn because I haven't. I just cracked it. But that book, Breath, where they talk about like the chain, and I actually got into this. There was a book called Deep Nutrition I read years ago, where the gal went through and she used a bunch of Weston Price's pictures to show the difference between faces of like. People that were raised in like a evolutionary kind of like a hunter-gatherer diet versus today. And they talked about like the narrowing of the face. If you look up True Nutrition, Charles.
Deep Nutrition, Dr. Kate.
Deep Nutrition.
You said Deep Nutrition the first time. Yeah,
and then I said True Nutrition, but it's Deep Nutrition. But she showed all the Weston Price. The one thing that's fascinating is when they looked at these like, individuals, the amount of chewing that they did because the food was unprocessed was like, could be anywhere from like 4 to 9 hours a day of like being able to chew through roots or like this, or even be able to chew meat that hadn't been cooked. So the idea is that because of the chewing, the jaw develops and then the nose, because obviously as you're chewing, you can't breathe through your mouth. So they talk about like the nasal passages, and like, it's pretty fascinating to think like evolutionary. Yeah. I mean, the food is one thing, but actually how the food was consumed and how it was processed is another key component that people tend to gloss over.
Well, Dr. Kate is another person in the film.
Is she in the film?
She's in the film. Processed foods is usually what makes people overeat. So yeah.
Well, it's the magical balance. Rob, I remember Rob in one of his talks made a great point where he's like, the magical balance of like overconsumption is the mixing of sugar and fat.
Yep.
Like he's like, think of a donut.
Yep.
He's like, when you take sugar and fat and you deep fry it in oil, he's like, you basically have created like the paradox of like obesity. And then the problem is like your body eats that. It's every serotonin response, and like you want to consume everyone.
And here's another side to it. Not only is that completely true, and that's what all processed foods are, these hyperpalatable combinations of those. And it's also the Weston Price. What's a donut? It's sugar, flour, and oil. Yeah. That's all it is. But also, it's that your body isn't getting any protein or nutrients. So a donut has 0 protein and nutrients, basically. It's just pure energy and sugar and flavor. So if your body doesn't get that, your body wants to get protein and nutrients. That's all it wants. And if you give it foods that don't have that, it's going to keep eating until it tries to get the protein and nutrients. This is kind of the protein leverage hypothesis that I think is super interesting. Is they've shown this in all different animal species, that all animals will eat to get a certain amount of protein, right? And so if you change out their food, you could do a study with a rat, right? And you get rats need 12% protein, right? So they have rat chow, 12% protein, whatever, carbs, fat, doesn't matter. They're fine. Then they can lower it, 10% protein. They give them like the same pellets, but it's 10% protein. They will overeat the exact amount to get that same amount of protein that they wanted, and they'll get fatter because they had to eat more calories to get there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that is huge. And that's why it's so bad that the protein has been going down in the population. You can actually look at all the population since 1980, there's been a huge uptick in obesity.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the dietary guidelines were introduced. And that's when the population started lowering their protein. It's actually gone down a couple percent since then. Mm-hmm. And that actually, if you do the math, it's like how fat is the population. It's kind of the same amount as predicted by how the protein is lowered.
Wow.
Yeah. And so your body just needs that. It's so simple. Your body just wants protein and nutrients. I always include nutrients in there. That's what I was trying to bring up earlier, is that sometimes the bodybuilding crowd misses that. Mm-hmm. Because I think there's more to health than body composition. Sure. It's kind of obvious. There's your immune health, and there's like all, we're talking about metabolic flexibility and all this type of stuff. So I always include nutrients in there, and we do that in the film too, where it's not just protein leverage, it should be nutrient leverage. And your body is looking for protein and nutrients. And if you don't give it food with adequate protein nutrients, it's going to eat more food, right? So that's also what I'm saying about paleo. It's like, it's a good thing. If you're eating whole foods, you have an advantage. We're talking about the satiety advantage, but you also have the protein and nutrients. Protein and nutrients are kind of tied into satiety. Mm-hmm. It's like, why can you eat an entire bag of chips and not get full? Because it doesn't have the protein and nutrients. It's not filling you up properly. And the opposite is whole foods usually have the right amount of protein and nutrients compared to their energy.